Greetings, listeners, and welcome to your January 2020 StarBase 118 podcast. I am your host, Geoffrey Teller, and joined here in the recording booth via subspace is Lieutenant Maddi Hyden from the Atlantis. Maddi, how you doing?
I am doing excellent, Teller. How about you?
I am doing great. And you know why I'm doing great? Because 2020 is going to be a huge year for Trek. We have already started the new season of Star Trek Picard. We have Star Trek Lower Decks brought to you by the guys who did Rick and Morty. And we've got the season 3 of Discovery coming in just a few months. There's a lot to be excited about in Star Trek land right now.
That is very, very true. I have watched both episodes of Picard, and I cannot wait to see what they're going to do next.
I am right with you on that one.
Haven't seen much on Lower Deck because, you know, it's all hush-hush and hidden from us. And then, well, we'll see what happens with the third season of Discovery because...
Fingers crossed they find that Red Angel, guys. I think it might be Michael Burnham, but I'm not sure.
Spoilers!
But that's the future of Trek. Before we get into that too much more, I want to talk about the history of Trek. And so does one of our contributors. Lieutenant Ravenna Carter has put together an interesting retrospective of Trek on the silver screen, starting all the way back in 1969 and going through to the newest rumors about the most recent iteration of Trek on the big screen. What do you think about leading us into that there, Maddi?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, the history of Trek is so diverse. I mean, from the time I started watching it to the time now, you've seen so many changes and so many different, you know, aspects of the show, from different ships to different crew to different captains. And each single one of them has their own unique combination to the show. And that's what a lot of people enjoy from the show, is that diversity. It's never the same in any show. There's always something different. And, you know, it's going to be an interesting piece to listen to. I know that Commander Teller here has done an excellent job recording, and
Thank you, buddy.
I definitely want to see what you got here. So why don't we take a listen?
All right, kicking it off right now.
Bringing Star Trek from the small to the big screen was a difficult journey, and while our favorite crew of intrepid space heroes may have gone boldly, they did not always do so successfully at the box office. Hi. I'm Geoffrey Teller for the StarBase 118 podcast team. Our newest member, Lieutenant Ravenna Carter, has put together a retrospective of Trek on the silver screen, and it's my pleasure to spend the next little while talking about where we've been, where we are, and hopefully, where we're headed. Our journey begins with an ending, all the way back in 1969. Even before Star Trek the original series aired its third and final season in 1969, Gene Roddenberry had been thinking actively about a feature-length narrative, but could find little interest with studio executives who were unimpressed by the original series' relative poor ratings and small audience. When the show entered syndication and began to build a significant cult following, those same Paramount executives began warming to the idea and agreed to finance the production of a script in the summer of 1975. It would be several years, and several revisions, before production began on what would later be known as Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Directed by Robert Wise, the Academy Award-winning director of movies like West Side Story and The Sound of Music, and produced by Roddenberry himself, the first film received mixed reviews at the box office, but proved to be a minor financial success. With Roddenberry removed as producer and a new focus on an action-oriented storyline, the second film in the series, 1982's Wrath of Khan, went on to become a critical and financial success, revitalizing interest in the franchise as a whole and leading directly to 4 more movies and 1987's Star Trek: The Next Generation. For many, this is considered the golden age of Star Trek at the box office, but, like all good things, this golden age came to an end with the 2002 film Star Trek Nemesis, which by all measures was a critical and financial flop. Reviled by critics and fans alike, Nemesis proved to be an unspectacular end for the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and it was nearly 8 years before Star Trek would be seen on the big screen again. In 2009, J.J. Abrams brought some of our favorites back to the big screen in a reboot of the original series. Instead of making it an outright redo of the older movies, he introduced the Kelvin timeline, where Kirk's father died, and the points we came to know and love never happened. Not all was lost, though, because we were blessed to see Spock Prime, played by the late Leonard Nimoy. With a budget of $150 million, our favorites graced the box office for the first time in 18 years. The film did well at the box office, earning over $385 million and scoring well on popular ratings review site Rotten Tomatoes, where it got a 94% fresh rating and audience gave it a 91%. In 2013, Kirk and crew were back with the second installment in the Kelvin timeline. This movie brought a new version of original series villain Khan Noonien Singh, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, along with an encore performance from Leonard Nimoy as Spock Prime. Into Darkness did the best out of all the movies in box office performance, earning $467.4 million. Critics gave the film mixed to positive reviews, netting it an 84% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Fans were more positive and gave it a solid 89%. Lastly, in 2016, we saw Star Trek Beyond come to theaters. Beyond shook up some of the relationships among the main characters, venturing away from the pairings that we saw in the 2009 film and Into Darkness. We saw Spock paired with Dr. McCoy, Uhura working closely with Sulu, and Kirk sharing his spotlight with Chekhov, played by the tragically deceased Anton Yelchin. Unfortunately, this refreshed dynamic didn't impress fans or the box office, proving to be the worst earner in the reboot series. Critics gave it an 86% fresh rating, better than its predecessor Into Darkness, but fans didn't echo the sentiment, and only gave it 80%. Derailed by the death of Yelchin and difficult contract negotiations with stars Chris Pine and Chris Hemsworth, a fourth installment in the Kelvin timeline has become increasingly unlikely. The project has also failed to retain a director, as several attached to the project have since withdrawn, including S.J. Clarkston, who was set to become the first female director of a Star Trek movie, and Quentin Tarantino, who had a vision of an R-rated Trekverse. As of November 2019, all cast members are expected to return under the eventual direction of Noah Hawley. If ever there was a cursed movie, this might be a contender. I am excited to see what Noah Hawley does with the franchise, and I am more than slightly overjoyed to see that Quentin Tarantino isn't going forth with the project. I was steadfastly against the idea of an R-rated Trek. It violated everything that Trek is, and would exclude a large chunk of its current fan base. I was hoping to see what S.J. Clarkston had in store for us, and what she represented in the franchise, but alas, she had to leave the project. The thing I am most excited for, however, is seeing the character of Jayla again. I really enjoyed seeing her and Scotty working together in Beyond, and I hope they show us her time in the Academy. I think she could put even James T. Kirk to shame. Thank you, Ravenna, for all your research and insight into the world of Trek movies on the big screen. This has been Geoffrey Teller for the StarBase 118 podcast. Thank you.
Thank you to Ravenna Carter and Commander Teller for that interesting piece on the history of Star Trek films. There's a lot of good information there, some that I didn't know and some that I'm sure the other listeners here didn't know. What do you think, Teller?
Oh, I agree completely. It was very interesting to put this information together. Obviously, the journey that Trek has taken on the big screen has been a little all over the place. You know, there have been some successes, and well, there's also been Nemesis. So
there's been some failures.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what were they doing in Nemesis again? Did they crash spaceships into each other after melting some ramen?
But it makes like they go to a Romulan planet, a scimitar appears, and to destroy them, and it makes no sense. Because he was Tom Hardy and not wearing a face mask, and that that didn't work for him. He was angry. Then Data's just like, I'm going to kill myself to save everyone else.
To get out of this movie a little bit faster. That was, that might have been a smart move from Brent Spiner. That might be why they're maintaining his legacy so much in Picard, because they were like, you know what, he was wise enough to blow himself up Spock style. And
I mean, honestly, I can just feel that after that movie, Picard did his famous face palm because it was so bad.
Yeah, he went back to the ready room. He warm custody. What just happened? Why did we do that? Was I in a dune buggy? Because I think I was in a dune buggy at one point in this film, and that's not really me.
That whole part made no sense. Let's just go to an alien planet with an android parts that were scattered about, and
then have an exciting dune buggy chase. As you do.
The dune buggy was cool, but they could have incorporated it in a completely different manner.
Yeah, maybe not having a dune buggy. That's one idea that I've had. Is, just look at that scene and said to yourself, what if this didn't have a dune buggy? No,
it would make more sense. It really would.
Speaking of things that have worked and have not worked over the years, one of our contributors, Melody Delri'ise, has put together a very interesting look at fashions in Starfleet over the years, the many different uniforms that we've seen on screen in the movies and in some of the different series, and some of the changes that have come along recently with the advent of Picard and what we're going to see later on in the year with stuff like Lower Decks. So why don't we throw it over to Melody and see what's in store for Star Trek fashion.
Hello everybody, this is Lieutenant JG Melody Delri'ise coming at you with a brand spanking new segment from the podcast team, New Year, New Uniform. The segment where I and all my fashion-forward glory will be ranking from worst to best with the 5 newest uniforms presented to us in Trek. Now, ladies and gentlemen, set your phases to stunning and stay tuned while we get into it. Kicking off our list all the way at number 5 is what is commonly referred to as the All Good Things uniform. Now, among the fleet of 118, they commonly met with some mixed criticisms, to say the least. Some like them, others are less than fond of this choice in uniform. This uniform features a full-color tunic sharing the same division color scheme of teal, gold, and red that had become standard since early Deep Space Nine and the entirety of Voyager. Personally, I've put this uniform all the way at the number 5 spot because I feel that despite it being a refreshing change from the greys of the Deep Space Nine uniforms, I reckon a lot more could have been done. Aside from the fashion crime that is the high-waisted pants, by the way, they feel just a tad unoriginal. Feels like they're doing something we've already seen before. Which in a lot of ways is kind of true, because it so closely resembles the TOS uniforms, it doesn't exactly have a character of its own. It feels basic, it feels plain. It doesn't feel like anything new, it doesn't feel like a new sleek design. It's not giving itself its own name. I feel like it was a very nice way of representing how the series has matured since the 1960s. However, for something that's supposed to feel new and different, it doesn't exactly do the best job at selling that new feel. While symbolically it's a very important milestone in Trek's history, it just doesn't do a good job at keeping the viewer's attention. It doesn't look eye-catching. It doesn't do anything that looks different to make it stand out. Now, honey, before I start rambling, we are moving on to the number 4 spot. Now, cheeky little Liz. Now, taking the cake at our number 4 spot is the much awaited, the much beloved, and the much speculated Star Trek Picard uniform. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the newest addition to our roster and long, long line of Star Trek uniforms. Now, some of y'all may like this uniform, some of y'all may not, but I personally did not really like this uniform. I feel like it was tacky. It has too many elements that clash with one another, and I feel like it's just another rehashed uniform. It falls into the same trap that the All Good Things uniform falls into, in the fact that it doesn't have an identity of its own. It doesn't stand out among the long line of uniforms. Every good uniform we've seen in the past, like the Monster Maroon uniforms, the original series uniforms, they do something completely different. They change up something, or they completely just overhaul the uniform itself. They don't pretty much just get a concept and change up a few shapes and bits and bobs and call it a day. That was my main issue with this uniform. And I also felt that the low-cut collar looked tacky, by the way, but I think more could have been done, which was my major issue with this. I felt like it also wasn't given really a fair go in terms of how expectations go, because Picard was very hyped up. Picard had a lot of attention on it for a long time, and everyone's been speculating what the uniform would be, and, that it happened. But in this case, a lot of the expectations are more like predetermined resentments towards the uniform. I feel like, again, more could have been done, but I just feel that they could have gone about it in a different way. Even just, even do something like the Odyssey uniforms from Star Trek Online, which we all know and love. We probably worn them at some point. But again, it's not something new we've seen before. Now, moving on to the number 3 spot in our list are the JJ Trek uniforms. The uniforms featured in the Kelvin timeline as opposed to the Prime timeline. Now, I don't hate these uniforms. I feel like they could have done a bit less, but I definitely feel like they've set up their own kind of aesthetic. When compared to the TOS uniforms, it does something that separates it from its original source material. And unlike the past 2 uniforms on this list, it does something a bit more original, and it has its own kind of character and theme to it. It suits the overall theme of the JJ verse, but my main issue is probably the amount of detailing worn on it, and also just the colors. The colors of the uniform, I feel, are a bit too saturated. They're very overpowering when it comes to having a white background. When you have a white background for most of a movie, especially on the JJ Enterprise, I feel like you need to be careful with how much color you're using. You need to not overwhelm the viewer's eyes, not just with lens flares, but also with how much color you're using. And this is not just talking about balancing out the color, but it's also talking about separating the color on screen so it's not completely overpowering to the viewer's eyes. I feel like these uniforms definitely could have been a better standout in the Kelvin timeline if the entire aesthetic wasn't so white and futuristic. I just feel that there was a missed opportunity here. There was a missed opportunity to do something that was a bit more closer to the original Trek, instead of going in a completely different direction of the whole modernized and really, different sci-fi aesthetic. Now, landing on our number 2 spot are the uniforms featured on the USS Discovery. Personally, I really love these uniforms. I feel like they do something different compared to the rest of the series. They stand out from all the other stuff that we've seen in the past couple of years. I definitely feel like it was a good step in the right direction in taking inspiration from uniforms such as Enterprise and the unaired 1965 pilot, The Cage. I understand it may not be what we're used to in classic Trek, but I feel like it's a unique uniform that gives itself an identity away from a lot of the other uniforms. Although it takes obvious inspiration from the Enterprise uniforms, it does a lot of things different. It does a lot of things different, and it just feels much more unique. The concept doesn't feel worn out. It feels very new and very eye-catching. It's sleek, it's fashionable, and it overall just looks gorgeous on the big screen. And now, hitting the top of our list, the moment you have all been waiting for, are the uniforms seen on the USS Enterprise on Star Trek Discovery. Now, these uniforms are ranked at number 1 because I feel that compared to everything else on this list, and anything else we've seen so far, they're the most well-executed variant of any prequel or new uniform we've seen thus far. Much like those seen in the Kelvin timeline, they do everything they do, but better. The designers of these uniforms simply just went that extra mile, and instead of already adding to an existing concept, they took what was already there, recontextualized it, and gave it a new theme. They made it fit the theme of Discovery with more pizzazz, more color, more spice. The uniforms not only look expensive, but they look practical and incredibly stylish. All the way from the collar to the metallic gold cuffs and the incredibly formal atmosphere created by just simply wearing the uniform. They created something that was visually appealing, and with elements of the Discovery's uniform incorporated alongside it. They remained true to the original subject matter, but also gave it its own personality, its own characteristics. And with that, our list is done. Thank you all for tuning in. My name is Maddi Delri'ise. It was a pleasure having you all here. Thank you once again for tuning in. I will see you all out there in the fleet.
Thank you so much, Melody. That was entertaining and informative. And actually, I learned a lot more about pants in Star Trek than I expected to ever need to know. So thank you again for your contribution to this month's edition. What did you think about that, Maddi? I definitely liked it a lot.
I mean, the fact that you was just talking about pants made me laugh, because really I have not had such an in-depth discussion of clothing in Star Trek ever. Never thought about it. Mm-hmm. It can be quite interesting when you think about it. Usually when I thought about it, I would think of like Picard straightening his uniform to make
the Picard maneuver.
Yeah, to make it prop and prim, as he was going to be, an ambassador to a new species or trying to, fix something. And I'm just like, never thought of pants in the Star Trek universe. Never did.
Yeah, but apparently you should have. We could have wrapped up this whole Borg and the Breen
just with pants.
Better pants. A greater focus on, I don't know, pleats. Maybe we should have gone with pleated pants. Maybe we shouldn't have gotten away from the bell bottoms from the 70s uniforms.
I don't know. The pleats may have made them like disgust as they looked at us, and it might
that's what
go away.
The pleats are what actually triggered the Klingon Federation War.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's believable. I've seen Discovery.
Hostility through pleats.
Well, I mean, they saw those jumpsuits and they were like, "Oh, no species that wears jumpsuits into space is worthy of survival. Kill them all."
Oh. Bring honor to your house.
Bring honor to your house and destroy those pants.
Kill the pleat.
Oh, yeah. These are the things that can get misinterpreted on Subspace, like that we don't understand, that, they just hate pleats, that like we could have just gotten rid of those and it would have been war over. But no.
Yeah. The worst part would have been if like the Klingons would have named one of their houses House Pleat. Then we would have issues.
There would be a lot of confusion, genuinely. There would be a lot of. I mean, it's bad enough that they stole Shakespeare, but then they stole the pants. It's not. This is how you get a blown up Kronos. This is how you get a blown up Kronos.
Yes, this is why Worf had to go be an ambassador.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it seems that worked out great.
Well, we won't talk about that. That's,
maybe for the next pod.
Maybe, yeah. We'll keep it on the back burner. See if it works for the next one.
All right, I like it. Kind of like how Worf kept his son back there, and he might work on it eventually. And if he didn't, oh well.
The son was just sort of there. It was like a placeholder for Worf.
I'm fairly sure that big weird chair that he kept in his quarters on the Enterprise was more important than his son.
Yeah, and then
this is my chair that has 18 balls on it. It is extremely uncomfortable. I love it.
Yeah, and then he had his bat'leth hanging there. He could just look at it.
Just to stare at my knife. I like that.
It brought his honor to his family while, the dishonor of his son. But in other news, Worf had to at least talk to his son at some points, and what better way to do that than subspace?
Absolutely.
And in our next segment, Laser Focus with Laz, that is what he talks about, is the implications of subspace. So why don't we take a listen and see what he has to say?
Looking forward to it.
Space, subspace, FTL, all of these terms get thrown around a lot, so it's easy to get a little confused about the differences between them. Space is an edification of the space-time continuum, or in other words, a fundamental property of our material existence. FTL, faster than light, once was thought of as an unsurpassable velocity barrier, is now commonplace in both travel and communication. So that leaves subspace. And no, I don't mean the club Subspace in the alleyway by the Academy off Morton Avenue. No, I'm talking about one of the most important aspects of reality, the thing that enables us to do so much of what we may take for granted. This is another episode of Laser Focus with Lazarus. I am your host, Lieutenant Junior Grade Lazarus Davis of the USS Constitution B. So yes, subspace. So first off, what is subspace? While there have been many explanations to date, including the famous honeycomb with an infinite number of cells line, but few are able to explain precisely what subspace is. And that's because the truth of the matter is that we don't know, or more specifically, we can't know on an intuitive level. what subspace is. Scientists can demonstrate its properties through complex mathematics and experiments, and engineers can manipulate its properties. But at the end of the day, there is no way to truly grok subspace. Think of it this way. Picture every color of the rainbow. We all know that our experience of sight for sighted species is simply a sensitivity to certain wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum. So, now try to imagine what a color would look like if it were outside of the range of wavelengths we can perceive. Can you imagine a color that you've never seen before? And part of understanding comes from being able to inspect it with your mind's eye. Subspace is not a factor to our material existence, so we can't effectively conceptualize it. We can't perceive it. Much like we can't imagine a color that we've never seen, we can't really imagine subspace. Now, so this is all a very long-winded way to say that subspace is a fundamental to reality, as anything else is, but it lies outside our perceptual limits. So I'll leave you with the best explanation I can think of. Subspace is a domain of reality where space and time as we understand them are fundamentally different. So while it may seem like subspace communication violates principles of physics by sending information faster than the speed of light, remember that it travels through a layer of reality that does not have the same properties of time and space. So, what did we learn today about subspace? Well, honestly, not much, but hopefully you have a better appreciation of why understanding how subspace works is so incredibly difficult. Even the greatest subspace scholars can only conceptualize it in metaphor and abstraction. And my friend, you and I are neither the foremost subspace scholars.
And that was Lieutenant Lazarus Davis, third in his incredible series, Laser Focus with Laz. We love him every time he contributes to the podcast. Thank you so much, Laz. And I'm sure you've got people around the fleet right now thanking you for explaining some things that generally fall under the category of technobabble, which is, it's a patented trademark of the engineering division. So nobody come near that if you're not wearing a gold shirt.
Gold shirt, indeed. Really? Come on now.
That's right. That's right.
Really?
That gold shirt, that is like your passport. That is your VIP ticket to Technobabble.
But you can't really argue that fact, considering gold also has comm ops and security. So the three of those combined, the Technobabble's insane.
Yeah, but I mean, we're doing all the work. We got to keep the lights on. Like, what are you guys running around?
So security just protects the ship and makes sure that your warp core doesn't, get attacked by other people. But
how's that going?
I mean, it's going pretty well.
I don't know. It wasn't going that great over on Capstone. How many jerks tried to steal that core? Folks, you may not know this, but recently our fleet has had a absolutely tremendous special event called Capstone, which chronicled the development and launch of a specialized Sovereign-class vessel known as the USS Juno. During its engine trials, space got a little bit bumpy. Why don't you take us through a little bit of that, Maddi?
Bumpy. Oh boy.
I mean, a little bumpy. With the explosions.
The first initial part's great. We're designing the ship in the shipyard. The second part starts. Very
relaxing, good time. Everybody's having a cup of coffee.
And the wonderful brew continuum. Yes.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
Then we start our wonderful cruise. All's quiet at first, and then all of a sudden everything.
I think we had one spider bot. There was a small spider bot.
Yes, the
situation.
Spider bot. Yes.
But at the time it seemed annoying. Reflected fondly when our problems were spider bots.
Hey, the spider bot was the least of our problems.
Yeah.
That it just spiraled downhill from there.
Pretty much.
Every single team got separated. Yep. There was a team down in life support. There was a team in engineering, and then there was your team on the bridge.
Well, because we had a ship of something like an average crew complement of north of 1,000, and I think there was like, I don't know, 8 of us. We probably just left some ensigns on there. Like, we just lost them, somewhere around deck 31, we forgot to go find them.
I'm sure our casualty list was high at the end of that.
Oh, wasn't good. No, it didn't fit into the folder. Like, they had to get multiple folders. It was ugly.
And then of course, as we end the program, what happens? The Orions attack us, because why not? They're greedy and they want our warp core.
I guess. Those guys are jerks.
Of course, if no one else knew this, Capstone was about the Warp 15?
Warp 15. Yep, Warp 15. Warp 15 core, which was a project piloted by then I think she might have actually been a lieutenant commander at that point, Lieutenant Commander Otis Aria, and Captain Rahman, who is now Captain Rahman. They worked on the development of the Warp 15 drive core a couple of years ago in a series of very interesting joint posts. And I think you can find those in the appreciations forums if you go digging for them.
And then we can't forget one of the key members who helped test before the Capstone was Lieutenant Kiliak Joe on the Atlantis.
Yeah,
who
served as
first officer.
Yeah, served with distinction as the Juno's.
Yes, and that whole project was just interesting. It went from calm to somewhat exciting to the ship's falling apart and we're all going to die.
Which, a standard Tuesday ends.
Yeah, especially on our ships.
Yeah, pretty much.
It seems like every ship in StarBase 118 has issues. I have to mention the time that an entire nacelle was blown up on the Atlantis.
That's why you've got 2 of them. What are you complaining about? Just get back to throw some tape on it and get back to work. This is why engineering's better. You security people complaining, engineering providing solutions.
Hey now,
where were you when those guys came to blow that name off?
One of our engineering officers actually climbed in the warp core to save us and almost died. So,
well, why did he climb in there?
It was a she.
Why did she climb in there? We don't need to be genderist to do something stupid.
Well, she wasn't doing something stupid. She was fixing something, and the only way to fix it without the ship exploding was to kill herself almost.
And that brings up a very important that's close to my heart as safety regulations in the fleet. We just have some unsafe working conditions for my gold-shirted brothers and sisters. And frankly, I think this is something that really should be addressed with, Starfleet OSHA.
Starfleet OSHA.
Starfleet Labor Rights Board. I don't even know. But I'm filing a grievance.
The Starfleet Safety Commission. I think that's what we need to call them. The SS.
But they have a nice, big, transparent building in San Francisco where they talk about this stuff all damn day.
Set in a big glass room.
Oh, yeah.
Criticize all the ships.
Every now and then the desk explodes just to remind them of what they're working on.
Yeah, they have to be brought back to the attention of what they're supposed to be doing.
Why don't we install surge protectors in these? Because this is more fun. It keeps the people in the field on their toes.
That's what we're supposed to do, right?
Exactly, right, yeah.
That's just what they're thinking, apparently. But anyhow, as we are talking about Capstone, here in just a moment, we're going to have Commander Kelrod, who is going to go into a brief summary of what happened on Capstone to give you, more of an understanding of what happened with this project. But before we do that, we're going to go to our sponsor.
Have you ever had one of those mornings where you sleep through your alarm clock and now you've only got a few minutes to take your hair from wild to styled? Well, say goodbye to the sonic shower and hello to the Soliton wave dryer. Within seconds, your hair will be dried to perfection, and with our new patent-pending anti-frizz technology, morning showers will never be the same. Look for the Soliton wave hair dryer on the Federation Shopping Network or wherever fine hair accessories are replicated. Discounts are available to anyone with a valid Starfleet ID.
Hello StarBase 118 listeners, this is Commander Kelrod, bringing you some news about a special project that has been done the last few months. Starfleet engineers were hitting the wall of Warp 10 for some years now, and they wanted to find another way to improve Starfleet ships to go faster without adding numbers to the Warp 9 scale. For that purpose, a few engineers assembled to come up with a theory. This theory, first devised by Captain Oda's Arya, later confirmed by Captain Roshanar Raman, proposed that there were additional layers on subspace that could be used to go faster than what was thought possible with the Mara engines. For this purpose, after the initial tests, they acknowledged that it was required a large vessel to accommodate the energy production of the new core, as well as its distribution, and that's when the USS Juno was assigned as testbed for the new engine. A crew from around the fleet was assembled to undergo this project. The crew assembled at Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards and started with a briefing on the design of the Juno. The ship was mostly empty spaces, providing a frame for testing. A sickbay was present in case anyone of the crew needed attention, engineering for obvious reasons, and some quarters for the skeleton crew that had to undergo the testing. Science counted with the standard sensor palettes to make the travel safely and even doing some tests along the way. The sensors weren't fully updated to deal with the increased speeds that the Mark 15 will provide, as the astrometics were unfinished by the time of its launch. Security was stripped to 12 officers, so the shifts were scheduled to get the most of them. Just before they got underway, they received a visit by someone named Mr. Blackwell that had a talk with the captain and the XO. After what, he left the ship. That mystery took some gossip between the officers, but nothing transpired from the captain or the first officer. The ship went underway, and soon they reached the Warp 10 of the new scale. When it got to Warp 11, some turbulence was detected, and instabilities from the field arose, but the engineering crew managed to correct it and they got to Warp 12. Things were going well until a routine check on a corridor discovered a strange object, or device that they assumed was a monitoring device. As they were inspecting it, it started to move and faced into a plasma orb. Then suddenly moved away, getting out of the ship by force, making a hole in the hull. After being unable to identify the object and finding another in sickbay, that one disappeared too. A bigger orb appeared outside the ship, and after some fire exchange, it disappeared in a flash of light. From the log of Captain Oda's Arya, we read: Captain's log, stardate 239611.30. We're en route to StarBase 118, currently cruising at warp factor 8. While the repairs to Deck 9 are completed, engineering and operations assure me repairs will be completed shortly, allowing us to resume the testing so we will not have to limp through the rest of the tour at what now seems to be a plodding pace. The surveillance devices discovered on board seemingly vanished as quickly as they appeared, and just as mysteriously. There were no indications of why they were aboard, or why had traces of technology from multiple civilizations. Both their fragments and all other traces have disappeared, leaving us just memories and the preliminary scans the security staff and medical personnel were able to take before they disappeared. I cannot help but assume the surveillance devices had to be connected to the anomalies detected by the crew as the engine was in flight, as the larger anomaly exhibited similar properties. It will take more time than we had to complete the analysis, but luckily for us, the anomalies don't seem to have reoccurred. After leaving StarBase 118 and moving towards the limits of Federation space, they were surprised by another entity, or object, mostly crystalline from an unknown origin. This thing attached itself to one of the pylons, and aside from structural damage, it seemed to be consuming the duranium alloy. The presence of that object disrupted the command functions of the ship, and the crew had to manage to isolate part of the computer core as well as some systems before being able to counter the effects of the object. On the starboard corridor on deck 22, Kelrod and Delri'ise were checking if there was anyone in need of help before being evacuated from the deck, where the object attached itself to the ship, finding some sort of energy powering of one of the bulkheads. It seemed it was an interphasic signature, coming from something that seems to be out of phase with the rest of the ship, or at least partially out of phase. Meanwhile, on deck 23, a team was inspecting the damage and trying to get the ship operational again, when they had to run for their lives, as another bulkhead was consumed by the object and the emergency bulkheads were closing behind them, threatening to leave them trapped and maybe falling to the decompression of that deck. Meanwhile, the bridge crew discovered that it was some sort of Orion probe that was threatening them. Reading from the bridge records, German Gauder say, "The energy cloud from the destroyed bits of Orion probe appears to be some kind of nanotechnology, but I've never seen this before. What are your thoughts on this?" Meanwhile, on the shuttle bay on deck 11, another team was trying to get the ship in working order, trying to affect the probe that was incapacitating them. For that purpose, they thought about using a shuttle, with its independent systems not being compromised. Unfortunately, the shuttle bay was caught in fire that threatened their lives and the shuttles, so they took a great risk to suffocate the fire with the emergency extinction systems that were offline. We heard Hamasaki saying, "I'm on it. You know that venting the shuttle bay at extremely high warp factors is high on the list of don't do this. Do you want to live?" When they decompressed the shuttle bay, the air rushed out quickly through the door, but not in such a dramatic fashion as they would initially thought. The heavy shuttle remained unmoved as the flames were quickly extinguished, leaving only scorch marks. When things seemed to be settling, another surprise. One of the officers took Captain Ravenna hostage, threatening to kill her if the other officers don't allow him to leave with the shuttle. However, the crew managed to fool him and transport both of them, leaving Ravenna back on the shuttle bay, and while they were deciding what to do with the imposter, the damage sustained to the ship created a failure on the transported buffers, and the pattern of the hostel was lost. In engineering, they also discovered another strange device that was hampering their power output. In words of Lieutenant Commander Teller, "Actually, I can't take all the credit. Look at this." Teller passes the suspicious piece of equipment over. That's definitely not a Starfleet issue, and it was tied into the absolute heart of the plasma flow control systems. Do any of you recognize the design? As they were investigating the issue, they discovered that there was an intruder on board. Security, along all the officers, moved to capture him, almost falling into a trap with a mine ready to ignite with movement. Previously, another explosive has badly injured another officer, so they were on the lookout for this kind of traps. They were able to disable it, and finally, after some hide and seek and some firefight, they managed to apprehend him. However, with a spy and no real installation to hold him properly, with the ship being fired upon by an Orion battleship, they used the disabled mine to let the Orions transport the spy along with the bomb. That, combined with the attack of a helping Romulan vessel, provoked damage to the Orion ship. Then, the unthinkable. A civilian vessel that was used as a bait to draw the Juno to the trap was destroyed. The fate of the 6,000 civilians is unclear, and they detected transporting signals from the Orion ship before fleeing the asteroid field that the Juno crew managed to use to their advantage. With the last of their destinations reached, the crew received the visit of Admiral Queen Reynolds, that along Captain Old's area performed a ceremony to celebrate the success of the engine prototype that will lead Starfleet into the 25th century. All that with a regret for not being able to save everyone from the civilian vessel. However, as they detected transported signal from the Orion ship, they still have hopes that, if not all, most of them could be alive. Many starships will benefit from the achievements of the Warp 15 project, as long as they reach the minimum mass of 700,000 metric tons. This will be another asset for the Federation after the success of the quantum slipstream drive that allowed for even deeper space exploration and increase of commerce within the Federation space. Quoting another engineer named Belana Torres, "It might be the warriors who get the glory, but it's the engineers who build societies." Certainly, the contributions of the Juno testing crew will help to mold the future of the galaxy.
Welcome back from that informative segment about the Capstone project by Commander Kelrod. There's a lot of information in there. We hope that it helped you understand a little better about the Capstone project, what happened, what went on. It was an exciting project. Be looking at our fleet news because there's rumors that summer of 2020 another event like this could occur, and you could be part of it. And it is definitely an experience you would love to be a part of. You get to meet new people from the fleet, and you get to just have fun. And that's the whole meaning of this group. But that is the end of our podcast for the beginning of January for our look back in time. We hope you enjoyed. This has been Lieutenant Maddi Hyden from the Atlantis. I was joined by Commander Geoffrey Teller.
Happy to be here, Maddi.
Yes, it was definitely a good time, and I'm sure the listeners will hear us again at some point. But for now, we're signing off from subspace. Have a good night.
Thank you for joining us, StarBase 118.